Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? Alright, today's episode. They're big, they're dark, they don't really exist anymore, they're air conditioned. So what do you have when you get drunk and cross a broken office chair with an angry vibrator? You get a TurboRide. Let's talk about it.
Now get ready, here we go.
Welcome to the channel. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about turbo rides. Now, this is a much older thing that not a lot of people have experience with out there. Luckily, I do have some experience with it, not much. For this episode, I had to reach out to one of my buddies that not only has experience with it, I'd say the guy's probably one of the most qualified people in the US right now to work on these old Turbotheater systems. So I reached out to him for a bunch of questions that I just couldn't fill in the blanks because they are quite the unique creatures. The TurboRide, or Turbotheater, is a Iwerks production. Now in 1985, Iwerks was founded by former Disney executive Don Iwerks and Stan Kinski. They started building motion-based platforms that utilized seats that moved underneath the person and a film on the screen to navigate people through the ride experience. Now, the summer of 1994, I remember this. This was when the Paramount Company rolled out the film Days of Thunder at their parks. Now, this was really fun because they put a whole big turbo theater in exactly for this ride, and I was just starting to cut my teeth in stock car racing. So the film hit, the ride hit, it's like 13-year-old me was loving it. Now during this time, they had also produced a film called Dino Island, and this was a very successful film that a lot of places loved and continued to run it. And then in 1998, they made Escape from Dino Island, which was a 3D film, one of the first 3D films for a ride motion simulator out there. So that was pretty interesting. And luckily the park I worked at got that film and they got a turbo ride. So this is where my experience comes in, is with this particular model. All right, so let's talk about the experience of these things, because like I said, these things are pretty much faded away into nothingness. There's not really a lot of these out there anymore. Their time in the spotlight came, it grew, and they left. Iwerks still does plenty of things. They still do lots of motion theater based things, but not these old turbo rides. So this film is pretty much focusing on the old turbo ride, not their new stuff. Iwerks actually does all sorts of installations all over the world. They're quite a large company. Simex-iwerks is now what they are known as today. So you could still find them everywhere. They still do what they are supposed to be doing, but I'm just not going to focus on their later stuff for this particular video. So blast from the past, let's get into that. Alright, so theory of operation, let's start. Guests come in, they're queued into a pre-show area. They watch a pre-show about what's about to happen for the attraction. After the pre-show is over, entrance doors open up, guests file into the turbo theater. As the guests go in, they pick a pair of seats. The seats are always built in two people, so they're pairs of seats stationed about 3 feet apart from each other. Guests sit down, ops comes by, checks the seat belts, makes sure everyone's buckled in. Everyone looks like they're secured. There's nothing on the floor around them because the seats move. If you place something up against your seat base at the bottom, it could crush it. So they don't want to do that. So nothing's around the seats. People look like they're in good condition. Seat belts are buckled. They go back. They go to the operator console. They hit the start button. The show runs. People enjoy their magical experience on the show, and they have all sorts of fun doing it because it's dark, it's air conditioned. Ooh, it's the best part of like a hot summer day, go into a turbo theater where the air conditions just blasting cold air. Ooh, it's some of the best out there. All right, afterwards, when the show stops, the seatbelts unlock, people get off, and they head out to the exit. At the same time, the exit doors open, the entrance doors typically open, and one crowd chases the other crowd out, and the process starts all over again. That is the basic principle of the ride. Okay, so let's go now talk more in depth. Okay, so I keep saying turbo theater. It's also known as turbo ride. Well, the two terms are pretty much interchangeable with each other. What happened is the system that they built is basically a turbo ride. That's the pair of seats. That's what you're sitting on. That's the turbo ride. But when you put a bunch of them together, typically in multiple rows, you get a turbo theater. So a turbo ride is, let's say, a handful of those seats just sitting together in a room. These things popped up in malls. They popped up all over the place. There were tons of them. So this may just have been a small little standalone installation somewhere. That is a turbo ride. But when you started putting multiple rows together and stacking a bunch of people in the same room, that became a turbo theater. These are typically known by their stepped seats. As they go up higher and higher up into the theater, there's more and more seats. So that is a turbo theater. Okay, turbo theaters were built in pretty much two configurations. There wasn't really a lot of difference to them, but there wasn't also a lot of full installations like these out there either. So the turbo theaters were either head-to-head with a second theater, or they were just a standalone. The standalone theater is like the one I worked at. That standalone theater was just a set of stadium-style stairs that would step down with the turbo rides placed along them in a nice array. The head-to-head was the same thing, but instead of just having one screen, it was mirrored on the other side. So they had two screens. Now, typically the way these things were set up is that the screens were with each other in the center. And the reason why that is because the screens were really big. They were really tall. They were like 70 or 80 feet tall and about 100 feet wide. So the things were really big and they needed all the room. So when you're building or constructing a building, you typically make it, point in the center where rain and stuff can run off. That's also the highest point. That's where the biggest part is. That's where the screen is. The projectors needed to sit behind everything about halfway up the screen. So that's the total height of the building was about half the screen width is where the projectors were. And the projectors were sitting about 150, closer to 200 feet away from the screen. Now, the walls were all typically made of cinder block, cement, things like that. Now, when you're standing outside of the theater, you could sit there and as you're listening to the pre-show, talking with your friends or whatever, the booms and bangs and oohs and ahs of the crowd on the inside of the theater can't really be heard. I found this out because the doors that are sitting right in front of you, the ones that would automatically open and close, those doors are about 2 inches thick and they are filled with cement on the inside. The cement is there to deaden the noise of the interior of that building coming out. The building makes a lot of noise, and it really does. But when you're on the outside, you can't really hear it at all because the whole thing is cement and it blocks the sound out from you. Now, when those doors malfunction and you have to take a door off, that was fun. We needed like 3 people to take a door off because a solid cement door, those things aren't light at all. Okay, we move our way to the inside of the theater. On the inside of the theater, you go in, there's a little bit of pathway lighting. This is so you can see where you're walking, but mainly it's dark on the inside. Why is it dark on the inside? That's the same thing for any theater. Why is any theater dark on the inside? Because the theater uses a projector to project the image onto the screen. Unlike a television where the light is coming out at you, the screen has to reflect the light from the projector back at you to see it. So it's critical that it's dark in there for that light to get properly rejected back at you. Now the screen itself is made from this metallic looking, I don't know what it is actually, but it's some sort of it looks kind of like a metallic or a mylar looking surface that's also perforated with just millions of little tiny holes all over it. Very like pinholes. You can't really see it, but they're there. That entire screen is put together as one piece stretched all the way to the top to the sides, and it uses rope and lacing to pull it tight against there. You start from the center and pull it vertically, and that makes the concave shape around you, and then you pull it out towards the sides to basically stretch it back out to where it's nice and smooth with no blemishes. Now, that brings us to the second part. It's cold inside there. Why is it so cold inside there? Well, air conditioning's nice, right? We all like it in the summertime. It's like, ooh, get in, it's nice and cool. There's a different reason though. There's lots of machinery down there. In fact, our turbo theater had 50 seat bases putting out a ton of heat all the time. So that heat had to be rejected from the theater and then cool air put back in to keep all that equipment running. Was that the only reason? No, it was not. The screen itself is very temperamental to any sort of temperature change. So a lot of times when you take pictures of those screens with the lights on, you will see that towards the bottom corners, which is where it all typically came in, the bottom corners you would sometimes see ripples in. That was because the theater was just a little bit warmer and that screen material started to expand which means the ropes tensioning it started to loosen and the material started to sag. There were plenty of days where we had to shut the ride down because there was just ripples on the edges of the screen. We couldn't fix the ripples because we say, well, you can go in and tighten the lacing up and get the ripples out of there. It's like, yes, you could, but then when you fix the AC and then the theater starts to cool back down again, it will become too tight, and then it will pretty much rip the lacing out of the sides, and damaging that screen is no good for anybody, so you want to stay away from doing that stuff. It's like, fix the underlying cause, which was the AC not working in that case. That brings us to the seats. Now, I really wanted to go through and find some pictures of the seat bases, but I could not find anything, nothing that I had. I never really took pictures of the seat bases, but I figured internet's out there. Internet has to have tons of pictures of these things. They've got to be just all over the place. So I started searching and searching and searching, and I searched a lot, and I could not find any pictures of these seat bases. I was like, wow, why is that? And then after I was putting the timelines together, I was thinking, well, you know what? When they were coming up and when they were popular, that was still a period of time when we were going away from just regular film, exposed film, into digital pictures. But we weren't quite all the way into digital pictures, not like where we are today, where everyone has a camera on their phone, they just take a picture and there it is. This was still time when it's like, no, we were still using just regular exposed film cameras for a lot of stuff. And I thought back to it, it's like, yeah, when I started working, I was like, yep, I had a little flip phone that did not have a camera. And then eventually I migrated to a phone that had a camera on it. And now, of course, we've got cinematic style phones out there that can do all sorts of stuff. But yeah, one of the reasons for not having a lot of pictures for this is because nobody took a lot of pictures, and the people that did, they're on somebody's physical film somewhere. They weren't really posted to the internet. That was one little problem I had, so a lot of this stuff, I don't really have much to back up for it anyway. All right, so talking about the seats. The seat, if you can imagine it, the seat is essentially a flight simulator base. All right, everyone's talked about, oh, Boeing has these flight simulators where you can make the cockpit roll and do all this other stuff. That simulator base underneath a pair of seats is essentially what that is. They're a self-sustained motion base that are hydraulically driven. Okay, so in the base of it, at the very bottom, you have this big thing that is a hydraulic fluid reservoir. On top of it is a hydraulic pump. It attaches to an hydraulic accumulator, and then it goes down to a set of three main proportional valves. The proportional valves go to three individual hydraulic cylinders that control the bases. I believe it was 2 in the back, 1 in the front. If I'm recalling that right, it was a triangle faced that way. I could have it upside down, but I believe it was 2 in the back and 1 in the front. And then those next to each other had these aluminum looking cylinders inside there. It looked kind of like a pneumatic cylinder, but they weren't. They were actually linear transducers. The transducer is a sensor that looks just like an air cylinder, but it puts a value, it causes a feedback reading across it. So as you expand it out, your value either raises or lowers depending on which way it's set. And then as you collapse it back in, it does the opposite. The linear transducers were needed so that the seat base was able to feed back to the processor. I should probably inject here and say that when I say processor, it's the one that's internal on the seat base. It reported to its own internal processor to give position feedback. The seat bases did not export its position and tell the seat base where exactly it was. Now, interestingly enough on these things is that the ride processor upstairs would feed the seat bases the information of where and when to go, and it was up to the seat base to actually make it to that position. That was interesting, I felt like. It wasn't like, okay, the ride didn't say, okay, all of you do this and wait for the feedback from the bases stating that it was doing it. It simply just said, you guys do this, and then it kind of just moved on, and it left it up to the seat base to act. This means that when you were riding, you could actually go to different seats and get a slightly different experience out of each one, especially due to how much weight was in the vehicle. Like if you had a bunch of 2 big people like myself in there, it's going to behave slightly differently than if it was two kids sitting. Also, if your hydraulics weren't in the best of condition, it would behave different. But essentially, the ride upstairs or the control booth would never actually know it because those seats didn't give feedback to say that they were in the right position, they were at the right angle or anything. The ride just said, go to these coordinates, and it gave them 3 coordinates, and the seat base would just go to that coordinate. Makes sense? In the morning time, we would switch the ride into a seat-based warm-up. This was, we turn the theater on, the hydraulics would all turn on, and they would start pumping and circulating fluid through there. And then after about a half hour of them sitting, we would go to a warm-up. And that would cause all the seat bases in unison, all of them, to rise up, and then they would start tilting in a rhythmic motion. Every single one of them would do this. So what you could do is while you're watching these seat bases kind of dance down there on the floor, you could see ones that came up and they just went to one side and stopped. It's because they relied on getting to one set of positions before they moved on to the other one, I believe, in this series, and it didn't. So it went up and it just went to that one side and stopped there, and that seat base was trying to go to the next position, but it couldn't. So it was just kind of stuck in that position. That's when it's like, okay, we would have to tag out that seat base. We'd be like, all right, shut that one off, go downstairs. On that seat base, you can put it to disabled right underneath there. You drop down. It looked like a giant accordion bellows underneath the seat. We just called that was called the skirt. So we just dropped the skirt down, and that would show all the hydraulic assembly and everything else. And then we would go ahead and just switch that seat to disable, from like run to disable. And then the computer would now know that that base was disabled, and on the operator's screen it would show X's. And it would say you can't use. Also on the seat base, it had some force feedback on there, so it had like a set of vibrators underneath the seat to shake every once in a while. So those were underneath there. They were kind of an on and off thing. I believe there was power variance just slightly to make them go higher or lower. And then the seatbelt latches, which was, you had the retractable side, and then once it was clicked into the latch there, both the retractable side would lock, so it could go in, get tighter, but not get looser. And then on the other side, it locked out the button, so you could not push the button and unlock. Those things are really simple. Honestly, never really had much trouble with those the entire time that was in operation. We did, however, unlike a lot of parks, just for story here, we did shut ours down. It was too expensive to run. We were running out of parts for it because Iwerks wasn't making a bunch of parts for it. Every time we needed something, the option was pretty much to retrofit to a bigger system. It wasn't to, oh yeah, let's get you those parts. The projectors were a thing in particular. It's like if you broke a part for a projector thing, for a projector, your ride was just, it was down. There was no more parts for it. So one of the things we did later on, the buddy that I was talking about earlier, he proposed to the park president, which is basically the park manager, said, hey, let's run that thing some more, and we can get a little bit of extra life out of it, maybe a couple years of life out of the thing if we ran it again and could offer it up as a new attraction. And they talked about it and said, yeah, let's do it. He went out and he contacted everybody. He contacted Iwerks. Iwerks said, well, we don't really have people that do that stuff anymore, but here's these people. And he got people on airplanes coming over from across the country. We went to some of the other parks that had mothballed their ride already, and he got projector parts and seat-based parts and things like that. So we basically Frankensteined the thing back together. It took him, I think, a solid year to do. He Frankensteined the thing back together and got it fully up and running with new films in it too. That was pretty impressive. Okay, so up at the top, the pre-show. That was just a pre-programmed thing. It was sitting in there. It was like a recorded disc that would sit in the controller. There was nothing really special to it at all. There was nothing needed to be special. A lot of things up there were on theater lighting controls, which were simply just you give it the start command and it would fade down lights and it would do other things as needed. So lots of theater light controls involved in these guys, but more like you would find in a legitimate theater, not so much an amusement park. At the top, we start by counting people in. So the reason we count people in is because ours, I believe, had 5 rows, and I believe it could do 100 people. There were 50 bases, if I recall that properly. So you try to count in 20 people to fill those rows up to the maximum. 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. Some of the bases didn't move. It was necessary to be put, if you They say, well, I couldn't do anything. It was be necessary to be on a base where you could still be buckled up or watched, one of the two, like an ADA access type deal. This was because while the theater was working for everyone else and everything was moving around, those people were now in a hazardous environment because they were close to other equipment that was working. So either they had to be buckled in or they had to be watched, and if they moved out of those positions, the ride had to be stopped and canceled, because now you had somebody going close to these big moving bases that, if they impacted you, would do a lot of damage to your body. It would not be a good thing. I also remember up on top there, we were repairing turnstiles like crazy, and turnstiles are expensive and they're kind of complicated to work on. So going to Disneyland all the time, I'm like, what if we went to optical turnstiles? We can go to optical turnstiles and do the same thing, and there's no moving parts, so there should be a lot less to fix inside. So what we did is we said, okay, let's try it, and they gave us some money and they said, let's try it, but we didn't want to go to an optical turnstile company and buy an optical turnstile, because they were still like $5 or $6 or something like that a piece. They were still really expensive, and you needed software because they were supposed to link up from all over the park. We didn't want to go that far, so we just created our own optical turnstile up at the top, called that the T1000. That was home built, home programmed, everything. So called it the T1000, and that was the start where people would count in and go down. So for the pre-show, the reason for the pre-show, is that because you're waiting for the film to rewind? No, it's not. You're not waiting for the film to rewind. For those younger people out there, when you were done with a film, a lot of times it was on one reel and it would all transfer to the other reel, and they would go like this. So once it was done, you would have to rewind it back to the beginning. Otherwise, it couldn't start again. But that's not the case of what's going on here. The pre-show is actually just to get people in line, queued up, ready to go down that row for the next time, while the show was executing on the other side. That was the only reason for the pre-show. The pre-show was typically the length of the show. That way, you would know when the pre-show started. A lot of times on a lot of things, the pre-show started, you would know that the show is starting on the other side. Instead of calling it ride start and things like that, they called it show. It was all show start, show cancel, whatever. The operator had control of that. They sat at the bottom of the stairs down there, and they would look up so they could see all the people that were queuing in line up on top on one side, and then they'd look over a little bit, and now they could see into the theater, and they could see all the people in the theater at the same time. It was absolutely critical that the operator sat in the dark for most of that. So there was hardly any lights. If people are like, I don't recall seeing an operator down there, it's probably because there was a dimmed or glass window there that you just couldn't see because they were in the dark. To look at people on the illuminated side was not a problem, but when you look over on the dark side and you look into the people in the theater, they were much harder to see. So the light had to be brought down. Okay, so let's move up top, kind of midway up to the top, into the projector room. This is where all the magic happens. If you were an earlier installation, you had one projector sitting there. If you were a later installation, which I had, there was two projectors sitting. Now, the projectors on the two projector side were called eyes. You had a left eye and a right eye. And the reason for that is they were running films in 3D. All right, 3D is its own thing. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the projectors are known as a 870 projector. So the 8 refers to the film in both directions. So there, the film is 70 millimeters wide, if I remember that properly, 70 millimeters wide, and it had 8 perforations on the film. This was how much it would feed each time. So that was the projector itself. Now, when we move into film, it's a much bigger subject, and this is where a lot of things go around with this. So it's like, okay, bear with me here. The film pulls through the projector at 30 frames per second, which is pretty impressive. That was kind of standard for a lot of high quality movie theaters and stuff back then. In the back side of the projector, there was a xenon bulb. It was a very big, high pressure, high sodium bulb that would illuminate at like, I can't remember what it was. It was almost as bright as the sun inside there. And it ran off of 150 amps in the back. That's a lot of current inside that. As you adjusted the current up, I believe it was current, adjusting the voltage up, oh heck, I don't remember. I had these big, like, I want to say rheostats in the back where you'd have to turn them down and actually fire the bulb. And then as the bulb warmed up, you would turn them back up to make the bulb brighter and brighter. Now, it had an amperage meter on the back. This is what I remember. It had an amperage meter on the back, and you had to make sure the two bulbs are running the same amperage. That way you got the same light intensity for both the left and the right eye. Since that xenon bulb was always on, it had a metal flap in front of it called a dowser. The dowser was what would prevent light from coming out while the projector was not running, because the bulb took a long time to warm up and power up, and it took a long time to let cool down and power back down. So it was one of those things, you couldn't just turn the light bulb on and off to start the film, so you had to put a dowser, a big aluminum blade in front of it to prevent the light from going out. The bulbs are so hot that we have actually melted the dowser before. That's how hot they get. In the back, there's a little thing, a little tiny round eyelet that you could actually see the bulb on the inside for. But basically what that is, it's a piece of welding lens. So you can get down, and if you look at it just right, you could see the arc, the element inside the bulb, and you could see it. Basically what you were looking for is you were looking for it to be steady, and if you started seeing it wobbling all around and moving all over the place, especially if it started getting brighter and dimmer, you would know that really soon the bulb's about to burn out. When we had to change the bulb, there was one guy who normally changed it because he required you to put on a flak jacket and gear, and you basically had to treat the bulb like a bomb, because if it went off, it would go straight through you. So every time that thing was changed, they had to put on, it was like a Kevlar vest and Kevlar gloves and stuff to handle the bulb until it was put inside of a heavy wooden crate and sealed shut. Then it could be transported by anybody. Bulbs are scary. All right, let's talk about the film path through the projector. The film feeds in from the top and goes through a constant velocity roller. Now, all this stuff that I'm going to describe inside the projector is mechanically linked, meaning it's not individual motors. It's actually one motor in the back that turns the entire thing, and everything through essentially a giant gearbox moves everything on the inside. So you have the film comes in and go through a constant speed roller. What's that mean? That means when you look at the film, it constantly just goes at one speed, left to right, or right to left, whatever you want to call it. Up to now that sound that I just made is typically what a projector makes, and that is the reason because there is the actual slide movement that happened next. So it feeds the film in at a constant rate. The film stacks up on the inside, which means it goes slack. It actually builds up because it's not going anywhere. And then there's another key where it pulls that slide down into frame. That is actually done by a special little piece that looks like a cross, and it moves in timing like that as it turns around. So every 8 perforations that it goes through, it advances it one slide. So the film builds up on top, and once it gets to a certain point, this is all just mechanical timing, it pulls the film in. When it pulls the film in, it goes in front of the actual rectangular view. This is actually what is being projected to the screen out on the other side. Now, once it's down in that view, in the back, once the dowser is open, there is a metal plate that's rotating that has 2 cuts out of it. And as that plate rotates around, that cut comes up and allows light to go through and then cuts off again. So it's actually going one direction the entire time, 2 bursts of light. Every time the film comes down, gets a burst of light, and then it stops, and then it pulls it to the next frame. The next frame comes in, burst of light, then it pulls it down. So you never see the film actually slide up or down in there. Once it goes towards the bottom, it also goes into an accumulation area where the film droops down at the bottom of the base. Then it goes through another constant speed pulley and feeds the film back out, back into the smooth motion. So you have film come in smooth, accumulate, pull down into frame, blast it with light, light turns off, you pull it down into the next one, and it turns back into smooth accumulation again. All those things working like that is where you get that clacking, that brrrr of an old projector. It comes from there. Actually, it sounds like that downstairs. You can hear the film up there going brrrr in the background. But realistically, when you're standing up next to that projector or projectors running, 2 of them next to each other, you pretty much have to have earplugs to stand there. It is so loud in that control room upstairs. Okay, so once it's out of the projector, we're going to move to the next thing. Remember, I was talking about, okay, you used to have to rewind film, and a lot of film studios or a lot of movie theaters, they would also have to go in and say, we're going to rewind that film, or we're going to rethread it back into the projector. Threading the projector is kind of a pain in the butt. It's not a forgiving process. It's very exact, and you have to do it at least once a day when you start the ride up, because at the end of the night, you have to go up there and unthread the projector, which is really easy. You open the sides, you go click, you pull the film up and out of the perforations, click, click, get it out, and hang it. No big deal, nothing to align. To put the film back in, lots of alignment, lots of everything else. It's a much more difficult process. And one I admittedly was not good at all. So a lot of times, like, I could do all the stuff in the Turbo Theater except for threading the film. I was not good at that. I didn't get the lineup parts right, so I stayed away from threading films into the projector. All right, so outside of the projector, you would have a film cabinet sitting. The film cabinet is actually where the film was stored. A lot of people, when they think of film, they think of reel to reel, where it comes off of one reel and winds back up on another. Well, that is an open loop. Once it's done, it pulls through, and then you have to thread the film again. Again, we don't want to do that when we have another cycle that has to start right after this one. So it goes into a film cabinet or an infinite loop roll, something along those lines. I've heard it called that, something like that. Basically what this is that the entire film goes into a cabinet and is strung up on rollers, top to bottom, left to right. It goes through all these rollers, and the entire length of film is stored inside of this cabinet. And at the very end, the film is joined right back together with itself. So the film is actually in an infinite loop. It will never open up. So as the thing is running, you got the projector pulling film in from the top, and then it's pushing film out the bottom. And then in the cabinet, you have another motor with a take-up in there, and that acts as like an encoder tachometer, basically, as it's running. If it detects that it needs to speed the film up, the arm will come down basically like the film is going under tension, and it will speed the motor up, and it will bring the tensioner right back up. It's a slide that sits on a vertical pole, and it measures tension on the film and adjusts the motor speed real time in the cabinet to match with what the projector is doing. So where we'd run into problems with this was starting and stopping the film. Sometimes that's when it might not catch up or might overspeed too fast, and then if any of that stuff happened, it would pretty much shut off everything and cancel the show, because it would say nope. Yeah, operators would do that. They would go down and start show, the lights in the theater would dim, and the show might go for a minute, and then all of a sudden it goes off and it goes show cancel. All the bases stop and all the lights come back up in the theater, and the operator's just sitting there, I don't know, it did a show cancel. It canceled the show for some reason. So then we'd have to go up and say, what's going on in the projector room up there? Let's go up there and find out. Okay, so moving along from the film, let's talk about the motion base signal and the audio signal. They were both taken from the same place. Basically, on the side, we typically use the right eye. On the side of the film, there is a little optical fork sensor that sits there and counts the perforations as it goes by. Basically, it turns it into a tachometer signal. Now, one of the things, it's not really going for speed, it's actually counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, all the way down the line. It's counting. So what has to happen is that when it says start, that starts counting, and then both the audio and the seat feedback is done off of a delayed start. As it starts counting up, it starts counting in the program, and then we told the audio, we said, at 6,900 pulses, start. And that 6,900 pulses, both the audio and the seat motion would start on that delay of like 6,900 pulses. Now, you could have a different delay for each one. You have a different delay for the audio and a different delay for the ride motion itself. But inside those, you could not adjust them. Once the profile started, you could not adjust the interior. So that was like rides off, that hands off. That was like a PLC on a ride. It's like you can't touch what it's doing on the inside of there. So all you could do is basically cause a delayed start in either the audio or the motion platform, one of those two. That was also time just to show you like where the theater was when we first started with that system, the audio was run off of Laserdisc. And then later on, we switched it over to a digital theater system, or DTS. So it runs just like everything else. It's a digital signal. But yeah, when we first started, Laserdisc, the big one, the big silver one. That's how it got the audio. All right, so let's talk about 3D.
The spirit of 3D!
And how 3D works. All right, so the first thing to figure out is that how your brain perceives 3D. The easiest one to explain is a parallax shift. Parallax shift is if you take your thumb and you hold it out straight in front of you and you watch it and you close one eye and you look at something in the background. Now fix your thumb with that thing and then suddenly change eyes. Look from the right eye to the left eye or vice versa, and you notice your thumb suddenly jumped one direction. Well, you didn't move it. That was just a difference in between your two eyes. So the left eye looks at it one way, the right eye looks at it another way, and that difference between the two, how far your thumb jumped, that's the parallax shift. Well, your parallax shift is also what your brain figures out, and it basically is using a triangulation to say, hey, if I look at this and it moves this much in both directions, if you focus on it, then the thumb kind of goes blurry on the two edges, because your left and the right side of your brain is saying that is based off of how far apart it is, that's that far away. That's your depth perception. You can't have depth perception with just one eye. You have to have two of them in order to perceive depth. So what they've done is they've taken two identical films, put them next to each other, and then they've basically blinked out one eye so you can watch the movie. How'd they do that? Well, those funky 3D glasses that you have to put on, those are polarized. And they're polarized opposite of what the projector is polarized at. So if you're polarized, let's see, your A is over your right eye and your B is over your left eye, the two different types of polarization. If you ever look at somebody, you'll notice that you can only see one of their eyes in the glasses, not the other one with your glasses on. That's because the polarization cancels out the other side. So if I have polarization A on my right eye, that means that the right eye filter that the projector is putting out allows me to see that image coming through that polarization. So right eye, I could see the right eye. Left eye, if I put a different polarization on the left eye, I can see the left eye, but the left eye can't see the right eye. And the right eye can't see the left eye. They use the opposite polarization to block out the opposite film. That's why when you take your glasses off during a 3D movie, everything looks blurry, because your right eye is blocking out the left eye image and the left eye is blocking out the right eye image. So your brain sees two at a slightly different shift from each other. And when it sees that shift, it knows. Really big shift means that thing is up close to you. Really close shift means it's really far away from you. And they like to play with your senses doing that. Now, that is the basics of how 3D works. Now, all that whole principle relies off of syncing those films together, which means that you have to start exactly. Now, when we put the film in, we have a number that we put next to it, and that's its home run number. That's the entire film, all the way around the entire thing when it comes back. That's how many perforations it took to get to that point in the film. So as the projector is running along, it's counting towards the bottom and feeding a number back to the computer. When everyone gets up and leaves, it's still counting. In fact, it's counting up, 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 and then you'll see it start to slow down. It will go slow, slow, slow. And then here comes the zero, and it comes all the way back down in there. And as soon as the zero frame gets back into there, the projectors stop advancing. And then they say that they're ready, which tells the system that it's ready. And then downstairs, when the operators are ready, it'll give them a blinking show start button. And it'll say, yep, ready to start the show. And then both projectors will sync back up and keep going again. Now, one of the things that messes this up is what's called a film crash. These are like a nightmare. So when the film crashes, that means for some reason, going through there, either in the projector or the cabinet, the film has broken. For some reason, like the perforations broke on the side and it basically tore the film, typically tears it in half, and then everything stops. The way it stops is because it tears it in half, the projector pulls out the one side, it can't feed the other side in, so the side that comes out and goes into the film cabinet, that big position slide that I was talking about that gives you that real-time projector feedback, that thing drops right to the ground and it goes to the bottom, and the ride goes, whoop, nope, stop. We'd have a problem upstairs in the film room, and that means your film is crashed. What you have to do to fix that is go take the film out of the eye, and you go say, okay, it starts messing up right here on this slide, and it finishes messing up on here. So you have to take the film over. Got to remember, all this is inside of a cabinet, so it's not easy to do. So you have to take the film over and cut those affected frames out of them and splice them back together. It's easy to do when it's like a couple of frames. But wait, there's more, because you've just done that in the right eye. Now in the left eye, guess what? Yeah, you've got to go open up a perfectly good left eye film, find those 2 frames that you cut out, the exact frames, and take them out of the left eye too. That way everything matches again. Your home run number that goes where the film comes all the way back around, it's now off by, if it was 2 frames, that would be 16. That would be 16 perforations, so you'd have to minus 16 perforations out of it. Or 17 or 18, depending on how many you cut out of the thing. Now, if you had a big film crash where it not only tore the film, but it twisted it, and you lost a bunch, well, when you do that and you put that back together, your audio and your ride are not going to be synced after that. They're going to be off. So what you have to do sometimes is you have to take blank film and put it back in there, or film from a different film altogether and splice those back into your original film, just so your audio and your video stay queued up for the most part. Have you ever been on one of these rides? For those of us that are older that have gone on them a bunch, you ever been on one of those rides and there was something kind of funky that happened, but you couldn't really explain it? There was some sort of like something flashed on the screen momentarily and you didn't know what it was, but it kind of didn't look like it was to the film that you were watching, but you also couldn't determine what happened. Well, they might have taken 5 frames out of another film and put it back in. A lot of times parks didn't have a sacrificial film to throw into that. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they had a sacrificial film they could just stare and cut frames out of it and put them back in to keep it looking correct. But a lot of times, once you get more than like 2 or 3 crashes on a film, the park would have to replace the film and get a whole new one. But new films are new capital because you'd have to buy the film plus the audio and the ride profile. It all comes together as one. But then once you have all there, it's just simply just load the film into it the next time. Wasn't a big deal. What is a big deal is having your audio and your motion platform too far off from what happens visually, and that gets everybody sick on the ride. That's no good. From experience, those people working on the rides that would say like, all right, we have to resync it back up. Sometimes they have to write it a bunch to figure out which way they need to push the audio or the visual to say, okay, this is correct. Because sometimes you can't find that exact spot because you've missed a chunk out of the middle. Sometimes you have to push it forward one way or backwards one way. Not an ideal situation, but those older systems, that's what needed to happen. The newer systems, like our upgrade from the projectors, would have been to go to a digital projector, which had a digital file, which had the digital motion base information. So that stuff essentially would never get corrupted. Either your projector works or it didn't. But the park did not want to purchase new projectors for the ride. It already took too many people to staff, because the other part of 3D is the 3D glasses. You have to buy lots of 3D glasses. Not only do you have to buy them, but you have to constantly clean them. Let's see. On your face lives all sorts of bacteria and things like that. I believe it's hepatitis B or C. I remember one of the variation of one of the hepatitises lives on your face, and you just take it off and you can give it to somebody else, and now you've got that on your face. So part of the disease control for the park says that, hey, when you wear 3D glasses, we're going to take those and then sterilize them essentially clean them afterwards before the next people use them. That's part of the disease control and prevention. That's the same reason why parks have, restrooms with hand wash spots, and a lot of the restrooms don't have doors on them, because the less time you have to touch a door, the less times you touch a door, the cleaner you're going to be throughout the day. So upstairs to fire the ride up, I don't remember the sequence that it was in, but it had a complicated sequence. We had all sorts of amps and controllers and things like that to power up, and they had to be done in a sequence. So we had little sticky notes on everything with numbers on. So going up, it was pretty fun to turn on in the morning time, because you would go up and you basically, first thing you do is you rack the controllers down on the bulbs so they had less current going through them, and you'd strike the bulbs, and it would sound kind of like a when they strike. It was get a nice big clack right there. It's interesting. So when the bulbs strike, it's like okay, and then you give them a little bit more current and let them start to warm up. And then you go back through, and then you just go back and switch on all the controllers back there that were up against a wall. We just go, these were all like lighting controllers, so they were just like click, 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 just turn them all on. And then we go over there, and then it was like, okay, then you turn on this computer, and then that one, and it was in order 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you just keep going around and around and around until eventually it was like, I think there was 15 things to power. We got to number 15, and it's like, okay. By the time you got to 15, the computer was now booted up, running on like Windows 94 or something like that, 92. So it was booted up, it was ready to go. So then you had to do a couple of things like select some start sequences or select a profile or something. It was very minor, but you made a couple of selections on there. And then you got to the point where you were ready to warm the seat bases up because they had been on for a while and running. You get the projector cranked up with its amperage so it's putting enough light out. You can go over, and then it was always fun to do the warm-up because you'd select seat base warm-up, and then you would hit the key and go load run. And then when you hit run, there would be sirens that would go off inside the theater, and then all the bases would go up and start doing their movement. It's like organized dancing. Cool. Let's watch that for a little while. But then that's when you could see if one base was stuttering as it was going around. You'd be like, all right, there's a problem with that base. Or if one base just did the one clunk to one side, it's like, problem. And the operator's console, there wasn't much for it. They had seat bases where they could see who was locked, unlocked, if it was occupied or unoccupied. So a lot of times these procedures are written to where if the base was unused and it said that there was nobody in it and the seat belts were open, it would just allow the ride to start like that. But if it was saying that there was a base sitting there where somebody was in the base, they were sitting down, but the seatbelt wasn't locked, then you would have to go deal with that. So some of the ride calls were things like, okay, you go out there and it's like base number 15. It says there's somebody in the left seat, but they're not. So the way to do that was you'd have to buckle the seatbelts, lock the unit out on the bottom, you switch it to disable, and then you put tags on it, you say out of service, and it's like, okay, there's a problem with the sensor underneath there. Typically, there was enough bases where we just said, we'll come back and fix it later. Wasn't a big deal. Sometimes there's a problem with the film, and if you need to know what problem there is, you got to get yourself a pair of 3D glasses and put them on and go out there and look. And you basically, because it was really simple, you basically just went out there and closed your left eye and watch a screen for a little bit, close your right eye, watch a screen for a little bit, or if you couldn't do that, cover an eye. So you could see like, oh, sometimes it was like the bulb was going out. Well, you could see that because when you looked at it in your right eye, the screen looked fine. You closed it and looked at it with your left eye, the screen was very dark. It was very dim. And it was like, oh, the left eye, the bulb is starting to go. Then we'd have to go change a bulb. Typically not like a ride call thing. Bulbs typically didn't just, boom, go out like that. They took a while to go out, but sometimes we had to go out there and do that stuff. Alright, I think that's long enough for this video. You guys ever ridden on these rides before and know what I'm talking about? Does anybody know of one that's still operating with these old ride-based systems in? Does anyone know that? Because I looked around. I honestly couldn't find it. Pretty much everywhere had mothballed their systems already. Let me know if you know of one that's still operating. Alright, that's going to do it for me. I'm Ryan the Ride Mechanic. Stay off the air gates. Bye.